Hey, my name is Frederick, and in this Compliance Gate video tutorial, I will brief you on the essentials on clothing and textiles regulations in the EU. So let's get started. So in this video, I will cover REACH, that's heavy metals and chemicals, children's clothing regulations, labeling requirements, and also clothing lab testing. Right, so let's jump into it. So first we have REACH. REACH is a framework regulation in the EU covering not just textiles but every material including alloys, plastics and so on. But in this video we focused on clothing and textiles. So what REACH does is that REACH lists SVHCs, substances of very high concern. This covers lead, cadmium, mercury, and a few other couple of hundred substances that may be found in textiles. The good thing is that you don't need to know which substances are regulated. So when you book, for example, a lab test, or when you buy from a factory in China or Vietnam, or even within the EU, you just have to say that this product, specifically the fabric and the dye, has to be compliant with REACH. So from your perspective, you don't need to know which substances and also which limits that the EU sets. So it's quite practical in that sense. It's quite easy to deal with it because you've got this one framework regulation that basically does the job for you. So you don't have to keep track of the different chemicals, heavy metals and so on that are restricted. Now, how do you make sure that your products are REACH compliant? I'm going to get back to this at the end of this video, but it comes down to lab testing. Okay? Now, lab testing is the only way to verify that a piece of fabric is compliant with REACH, but I'm going to get back to that at the end of the video. Another framework, this is not a regulation but it's a voluntary framework called OECO-TEX Standard 100, developed by I think they're Swiss-based organization, OECO-TEX, and what they do is that they sort of merge all the main legal requirements in the major markets of the world, including the EU, United States, and, that might be it actually. Anyway, that's another way that you can actually refer to REACH compliance, as REACH is actually included in Standard 100. But if you just plan to sell in the EU, then referring to REACH is the easiest way. Right. Step 2, part 2 of this video, we have children's clothing. Now, REACH applies to every product. Doesn't matter if you sell a t-shirt for, adults or, baby wear. However, there are regulations that apply specifically to babies and children, normally defined as 12 years or younger. This doesn't cover chemicals and heavy metals, but these two EN standards specifically regulate and set technical requirements for fabric flammability and also physical properties covering drawstrings and so on. So if you intend to manufacture, export or import children's clothing, then you need to comply with EN 14878 and possibly EN 14682. Now keep in mind, this video may be outdated tomorrow. The purpose is to just give you a very brief introduction, so there may be additional EN standards that do apply to your product, but you can, for example, search the British Standards Institute's online store for European standards, and you can just search, for example, children's clothing or children's nightwear, for example. You will find a list will pop up, and that way you can also assess if additional regulations apply. Now, step 3, we have labeling requirements. Labeling requirements specifically for textiles. So in the EU, you need to, that's actually the case pretty much everywhere, specify the fiber composition, and this refers to, the textile itself. So if you're selling 100% cotton, a t-shirt 100% cotton, it has to be labeled as such. Care instructions. This should accurately explain how washing, drying, and so on. And this also has to be in the language. It has to be written in the language where you intend to sell the product, which can be quite tricky in a marketplace such as the EU, where we have, I don't know, 25 different, I don't know, 30 different official languages. But my recommendation is that you go with the main languages if you plan to sell EU-wide, stay on Amazon. That's, of course, English, French, German, and possibly also Spanish. Okay, yeah, even Italian. Another option, if you plan to start within one EU country, you can start with that language. Well, for example, Danish or Dutch, just to give an example, and also add an English language label. I don't think that the postal services in the EU would ever cease and destroy or issue a recall based on a non local language label. So English is normally enough. And this should not just be a sticker, it should be permanent. There are two ways to apply that. You can use a patch, such as the orange thing you see on the left, or you can also have a print. We see that more and more, a print in the neck, for example. As long as it's permanent, it's okay. Optional. Size is actually not mandatory, but it's going to be a hard time selling your pieces if you don't have some sort of size indication. And the EU is actually publishing standardized, size chart, guideline size charts. It's up to you if you want to use them, but clearly you want to avoid returns, so you need some sort of reference point. And country of origin, such as made in China, made in Vietnam, made anywhere, is actually not mandatory in the EU, at least not for clothing. Alright, last but not least, we have textiles lab testing. And the point of lab testing is that you verify if the material, specifically the fabric, is REACH or EN compliant if this concerns children's clothing. Okay, so the way this works is that you can purchase material samples, so you can also collect complete units, say a finished T-shirt, for example, and you can send that to a third-party compliance testing company. A few of them, Intertech, SGS, Chima in Hong Kong, where we're based, for example, and you submit. You basically just send over a sample, they give you a quote, and within 1-2 weeks they give you a test report, which basically lists out all the substances that they believe within the REACH regulation that they should check for your product. Okay, so as I said, it's the compliance testing company that makes that assessment, making your life a lot easier. And they will also list the result for every single substance that they have tested your product according to, and hopefully it's going to say ND everywhere, which means not detected. Okay, and that basically means the product passed the test, because REACH is binary. Compliance as a whole is binary. Either the product passed the test or it does not. There's no way to say, okay, it's 90% good, it's 90% legal, you can go and sell it. The thing is that if your product is non-compliant, meaning that out of, say, 400 substances, just to give you an example, just one fails, meaning that it detects an amount for that specific substance above the limit, then the product is thus non-compliant. Okay, so for that reason, lab testing, although not mandatory, at least not for REACH, it's still something we strongly recommend, because it's the only way to actually verify that the product you're selling is compliant. However, lab testing is not free. Okay, you're looking at least 100 US per fabric, and I should also specify per color. Okay, so you got you got the same polyester fabric, for example. One is green, one is blue, one is orange. Okay, so you got 3 colors. That's going to be 3 times 100, 300. Okay, so it multiplies for each fabric and color that you need to get tested. Okay. Right, so let's summarize the compliance process. Now, when it comes to textiles, it's not really that difficult. So, number one, you have to confirm the regulations that apply to your product and reach possibly also EN standards which apply all over the EU. Okay, it used to be national standards. These days, they are harmonized, meaning that EN standards apply everywhere. Germany, Sweden, where I'm from. About to say the UK, but we'll see about that. Germany, Spain, etc. So you got one set of regulations or standards to be specific. Now in step two, you have to create a textiles label files. Your supplier will not create that for you, assuming you are manufacturing overseas, which many of you are. So you actually have to create that label file and send it to them. So that's step two. And step three, you have to order product samples, be that fabric samples or collection. You have to collect products directly from the mass-produced batch of products, say in China, and then book third-party lab testing. So this is the three-step compliance process for textiles. Now we have a few questions that we get all the time, so let's just clarify that in this video. Right, I'm importing products from overseas. Am I responsible for ensuring compliance? Yes, you are. Now, the way it works is that when you, as an importer based in the EU, you import products from, well, for example, China or India, and it turns out that your product is non-compliant, then you will be responsible for that, meaning that you will have to issue a recall, basically, refund your buyers and, well, make sure that they, send back the product. Not that common when it comes to textiles, but it can still happen. Authorities, national authorities, not EU level authorities, are actually doing conducting inspections in shopping malls, and even buy products online. To verify if the products are compliant by by doing their own testing. So you have to remember that you will not get any assistance from your overseas suppliers when it comes to ensuring compliance following the procedure that I just showed you. So this means that you need to instruct the supplier that they have to ensure that the fabrics they use, because not every fabric in the world is REACH compliant, okay? But they have to specifically use REACH compliant fabrics, okay? Step two, you have to create the label files according to EU regulations. And then you have to send that file. It could be a PDF, it could be a PNG, could be made in Adobe Illustrator, but you have to make that file and you have to send that to the supplier and tell them, hey, you have to print this as a nylon patch or print it directly on the fabric, on the the inside, the neck, for example. And then it's up to you to book lab testing, and well, you also have to pay for it. Not going to get any subsidies from the supplier. Well, I got a bit ahead of myself to already answer that question, but anyhow, you will cover the lab testing costs. It's not covered by the supplier. And a lot of buyers are, well, negatively surprised, to say the least, when they have a collection of products, maybe 10 different t-shirts, just to give you an example, in different colors and so on, and get a quote from, say, $1,000 to $1,500. And as I said, lab testing costs, at least when it comes to textiles, is very much based on a number of fabrics, number of colors. So even though this may stifle the creative process, the best way to actually reduce your lab testing costs is by not using 10 different or 15 different colors and fabrics. If you can find a way where you can use the same fabrics and the same colors across different SKUs, across different designs, then you don't have to test every single design. Okay? Then you can, if you have 10 different SKUs, but they all made up of the same five colors and fabrics, then you save money. As you only have to do 5 lab tests in that case. And truth be told, you don't have to test every single fabric, every single color, okay? And I would say that most of our customers don't test every single fabric and every single color. But compliance is still, by definition, you have to comply. And, well, the more fabrics and colors you have, the more lab tests you should be doing, okay? Now, how do you create the label file? Well, as I said, you can. I mean, it could be hand drawing. It could be as long as your consumer can actually read it. It's that's it really. So I recommend that you use something like Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator. It doesn't really matter. As long as you can turn that into a PDF or AI file or EPS file or JPEG or whatever that the supplier can print. Just don't make the mistake of telling the supplier, hey, I need this, I need this, I need that, I need carrying instructions, or even worse, hey, I want you to make a label that's EU compliant, for example. That doesn't work because it's not the supplier's job to keep track of different and changing compliance requirements in overseas markets. So you have to create this, and if you don't have a program, you just don't have the expertise to create a label, well, you can just find someone on Upwork that can make it for you for like $25 or something, or maybe even $5. But you need to create the label file. Okay. Now, what can happen if you import non-compliant products? Now, to be fair, it's a big difference between importing and selling t-shirts compared to, say, plastic dolls or power banks, because t-shirts don't explode in your face. They rarely self-ignite and burn down an entire house. So yeah, it's a low-risk product. What we see in the EU is that national authorities, I already mentioned this actually, they do spot checks in like physical stores, like retailers, brick and mortar. They also buy products from online stores, and well, of course, not under the real organization names, but as ghost purchases, and they take that to the facilities, and they do lab testing. Two reasons. One is to gather statistics, okay, to feel the market, like what's the ratio of products on the market, imported products, which can actually pass REACH, for example, or other regulations depending on the product. But then it's also to put pressure on importers to actually enforce this, to give you an incentive, because there has to be regulations, also have to be complemented by appropriate enforcement. And there have been cases with authorities, market surveillance authorities in various EU states, basically saying, hey, your product is non-compliant, you have to pull this. And a big retailer, okay, that's they lose a couple of million euros. That's like 0.5% of entire revenue. Doesn't really matter. But if you're a small business just launching your first collection, and you get a recall notice like that, it's game over. You KO. So for that reason, compliance testing when it comes to textiles is essentially about risk management. My advice is that you do at least a couple of tests to get an idea, at least on a per fabric basis, to have documentation and have an idea, a pretty good idea at that, whether your products are compliant or non-compliant. And clearly, that all lab testing has to be done before you ship the products into the EU, or if you're an exporter, before you export to the EU. All right. If you want assistance with compliance, you can go to compliancegate.com/help and fill out this form. Product name, product category. Tell us what sort of assistance you need. Specify the target market, where's the product manufactured, where do you plan to sell it, and your details. And we will get back to you with information about how we can help you make sure that your products are compliant. And this is a free service. Of course, we will send you a price quotation detailing what we can do and the cost, but it's completely free to request a quotation on compliancegate.com/help.